One number, just one number on a forecast map. 45%. Most people wouldn't even notice it. A probability. A percentage. But to meteorologists, it was a number they almost never use. A number that makes hands shake when they type it into the system. Because 45% means certainty is coming. On April 27, 2011, that number turned prophetic. By the time the sun set that evening, 4 EF5 tornadoes had carved their names into history. Dozens more, violent, relentless, unstoppable, had torn across 6 states. Over 300 lives gone. Entire towns erased. This is the story of the deadliest tornado day in modern American history. Minute by minute, storm by storm. The day the atmosphere showed us exactly what it's capable of. But it didn't start on April 27th. No. The warning signs appeared 2 days earlier. April 25th, 2011. Monday morning. A powerful upper-level trough, a dip in the jet stream, was digging into the southern plains. Cold air aloft, warm, unstable air at the surface. Wind shear, the kind that spins storms, was building. The ingredients were aligning. By afternoon, the first tornadoes touched down in Arkansas and the Mississippi Valley. 42 tornadoes that day alone. In Valonia, Arkansas, an EF2 carved through neighborhoods. At Hot Springs Village, an EF3 claimed the first life of what would become a 4-day nightmare. 5 people died on April 25th. But forecasters knew this was just the beginning. April 26th brought 55 more tornadoes. Weaker mostly, large hail, damaging winds. The system was marching east, gathering strength. One brief EF3 touched down at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. But that day, no tornado fatalities. The atmosphere was loading the gun. By Tuesday evening, meteorologists at the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, were staring at computer models with growing dread. Everything, the jet stream, the moisture, the instability, the shear, everything was coming together, over the Deep South, all at once. They started drafting an outlook they hoped they'd never have to issue. Wednesday morning, April 27th. Dawn broke gray and ominous across Alabama. Before most people finished their coffee, a squall line, a solid line of thunderstorms, was already tearing across the Tennessee Valley. These weren't the main event. They were the opening act. Embedded within that squall line, tornadoes, brief, fierce, destructive. Trees snapped like toothpicks. Power lines came down, town by town, county by county. And here's where the first domino fell. Those downed power lines, they didn't just leave homes dark. They knocked out NOAA weather radio transmitters. Emergency sirens lost their electricity. In some communities, the very systems designed to warn people went silent. When the big storms formed later that afternoon, some people had no way to hear the warnings. The irony was cruel. The morning storms, the ones that prepared the atmosphere for what was coming, also destroyed the infrastructure that could save lives. By 9 a.m., the squall line had moved through. The sun tried to break through ragged clouds. The air felt wrong, heavy, electric. That strange calm before nature stops pretending. People cleaned up branches, assessed damage from the morning. Some lost power, so they couldn't watch TV or check weather apps. They didn't know that, high above them, satellite images were showing meteorologists something terrifying. 11:29 a.m. Central Time. The Storm Prediction Center issues its Day 1 convective outlook, and there it is, in stark red and black. A high-risk area stretching from Mississippi through Alabama, Tennessee, and into Georgia. High-risk days are rare. Only a handful each year across the entire country. But this was different. Inside that high-risk zone, forecasters placed a hatched area with a 45% probability of tornadoes within 25 miles of any point. 45%. To understand what that means, typical severe weather days might have 5, maybe 10% probabilities. 20% makes headlines. 30%? That's a major outbreak. 45% means the atmosphere is locked and loaded. The bulletin's wording was direct, urgent. Particularly dangerous situation. Numerous strong to violent tornadoes are expected. Widespread significant damage likely. Considerable loss of life possible. Forecasters don't use words like that lightly. Every word debated, every phrase weighed, because they knew. The models were screaming it. The satellite data confirmed it. The morning instability was already building. This was going to be historic. Radio stations broadcast warnings. TV meteorologists cleared their afternoon schedules. Emergency managers activated response teams. Storm chasers from across the country converged on Alabama, and then the waiting. Because you can see it coming, can predict it with incredible accuracy, but you can't stop it. Around 1 p.m., the first supercell thunderstorms began firing along a line from Mississippi into Tennessee. These weren't ordinary storms, deep, rotating mesocyclones, powerful updrafts, classic supercell structure. The towers built and built and built into the sky. And then they began to touch down. 2:30 p.m., Central Time, Philadelphia, Mississippi. The first EF5 of the day drops from the sky near Kemper County. Now, you have to understand what EF5 means. The enhanced Fujita scale measures tornado damage from 0 to 5. EF5 is the top. Winds estimated over 200 miles per hour. Total destruction. But it's not just about wind speed. It's about what the tornado does to the earth itself. In Philadelphia and Kemper County, the tornado didn't just destroy buildings. It scoured the ground, stripped away topsoil, removed asphalt from roads, the pavement itself, torn up and scattered. 3 people died in those first terrible minutes. But here's what made forecasters' blood run cold. This was happening exactly where they said it would. The atmosphere was following the script perfectly, which meant everything else they predicted was probably coming too. The Philadelphia tornado was on the ground for miles, carving a path of EF4 and EF5 damage through rural Mississippi. Deep ground scouring, trees debarked and snapped at ground level, the kind of damage that shouldn't be possible. But there it was. Storm chasers who intercepted it reported visibility near 0 in the debris cloud. The condensation funnel itself was wrapped in so much dirt and debris that it looked like a black wall, not a tornado. This wasn't the worst one, not even close. 3:40 p.m., Central Time. The sirens wailed in Smithville, Mississippi, a town of about 950 people, small, tight-knit, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. They had maybe 15 minutes warning. Some people went to their basements, others to interior bathrooms. Some, God help them, had nowhere to go. Mobile homes, no basement, no safe room. The tornado that hit Smithville was catastrophic. Another EF5. It came from the southwest. A massive wedge tornado, over 3/4 of a mile wide at points. The roar, witnesses later described it, didn't sound like a freight train. It sounded like a jet engine at full throttle, mixed with the tearing of metal and the screaming of wind. Homes didn't just blow apart. They vanished, reduced to slabs. Concrete foundations swept clean. In the most intense areas, even the anchor bolts were ripped out of the concrete. 23 people died in Smithville and along the tornado's path. But there's one detail that captures the power of this storm more than anything else. A full-size SUV, a Chevrolet Tahoe, several thousand pounds, was picked up, carried through the air, and thrown into a water tower. Not near it, not against it, into it. The impact dented the steel tank. When engineers examined the damage later, they had trouble comprehending the forces involved. We're talking about winds so strong, so violent, that they could lift a vehicle weighing as much as a small elephant and hurl it hundreds of feet through the air with enough force to dent industrial steel. An aerial view showed the tornado's scar across the landscape, a brown wound, perfectly straight, where green forest had stood that morning. But Smithville wasn't the end. It wasn't even the worst. The deadliest tornado of the outbreak was already on the ground. 3:05 p.m. Central Time, near the Alabama-Mississippi state line. A supercell that had been tracked for over an hour finally produced. The Hackleburg-Phil Campbell tornado touched down west of Hackleburg, Alabama. What happened over the next hour and 45 minutes would become the deadliest single tornado of the entire outbreak. This tornado stayed on the ground for 102 miles. Let that sink in. 102 miles. That's the distance from Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia. This tornado carved a continuous path of destruction for nearly 2 hours, maintaining EF4 to EF5 intensity for most of its life. Peak winds were estimated at 210 miles per hour. In Hackleburg, a town of fewer than 2,000 people, the tornado was merciless. The entire business district gone. 18 people died in Hackleburg itself. The Wrangler jeans plant, a major employer, completely destroyed. Survivors described the moments before impact. A strange quiet after the sirens stopped. Then, a sound. Not wind, not rain. A deep bass rumble that you felt in your chest before you heard it. The kind of sound that triggers every primal instinct to run. But there was nowhere to run. The tornado was so wide, nearly a mile at points, that trying to escape by car was suicide. It would catch you. And in a vehicle, you had almost no chance. People huddled in bathtubs, covered by mattresses, in closets, under staircases, praying. The tornado moved east-northeast at 55 miles per hour, a relentless, grinding advance. Phil Campbell, Alabama. The tornado arrived around 3:50 p.m. The town took a direct hit. Another 22 people died there. The tornado was so violent that it created what meteorologists call debris granulation, where wooden debris isn't just broken, it's shredded into pieces so small they look like mulch. Entire blocks of homes, slabbed. Cars thrown hundreds of yards. Metal wrapped around the few trees left standing, and those trees completely debarked, stripped of every branch, every leaf, just wooden poles stuck in the ground. The tornado continued northeast, through rural Franklin and Lawrence counties, farming communities, isolated houses. Each one in its path faced the full fury of an EF5. By the time it finally lifted at 4:50 p.m., near the Tennessee state line, the Hackleburg-Phil Campbell tornado had killed 71 people, 71, in a single tornado. The deadliest tornado in the United States since an era when warnings didn't exist. And here's the thing that haunted forecasters. Warnings had been good. Average lead time that day was 24 minutes. The Storm Prediction Center nailed the forecast. Local National Weather Service offices issued clear, urgent warnings. People knew it was coming, but knowing isn't always enough. While the Hackleburg-Phil Campbell tornado was still raging, another supercell was organizing to the south. This one, the entire country would watch, live, 5:10 p.m., Central Time, western Tuscaloosa County, Alabama. A tornado touches down, initially rated EF3, but rapidly intensifying. By the time it reached the city of Tuscaloosa, home to the University of Alabama, population over 90,000, it had grown into a massive EF4 wedge tornado. At its widest point, 1.5 miles across. Think about that. A tornado wider than 15 football fields side by side. And unlike rural areas, this one was heading straight for a city. Local TV meteorologists, James Spann and others, were broadcasting live. Radar showed the tornadic debris signature. The hook echo was textbook, and they could see it. Camera shots from helicopters and storm chasers showed a black churning wall approaching the city. Please, if you're in Tuscaloosa, take cover now. This is a life-threatening situation. Do not wait. Get underground if you can. Get to your safe place now. The desperation in their voices was palpable. The tornado entered Tuscaloosa around 5:13 p.m. For the next 6 minutes, it carved a path of EF4 destruction through neighborhoods, businesses, and the heart of the city. The Alberta neighborhood working-class homes was obliterated. Trees that had stood for a century snapped. Brick buildings collapsed. Strip malls unrecognizable. Cars tossed like toys. And people could only watch. Those in the path had minutes, maybe seconds to react. Those outside the path watched on television as a city they knew, streets they'd driven, places they'd shopped, were destroyed in real time. The tornado didn't stop at Tuscaloosa. It continued northeast, EF4 intensity maintained, heading straight for Birmingham, Alabama's largest city. 6 p.m. The tornado was in the Birmingham metro area. Not the downtown core, thankfully, but the northern suburbs. Pratt City, a historic African-American community, took a devastating hit. More homes destroyed, more lives lost. The tornado finally lifted around 6:20 p.m. near Tarrant City. It had been on the ground for 80 miles of continuous destruction. 65 people died along the Tuscaloosa-Birmingham track. More than 1,000 were injured. Because this tornado hit cities, populated areas, the casualties were staggering. But they could have been worse, much worse. Why? Because people had warning. They saw it on TV. They heard the sirens, where sirens still worked. They made the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. But here's the cruel complication. Remember that morning squall line, the one that knocked out power? Here's what happened. As the afternoon supercells formed, as warnings were issued, as tornado emergencies were declared, many people couldn't receive them. No power meant no TV, no weather radio, if you even had one. Cell towers were overloaded. Some had been damaged. In rural areas, the no-AA weather radio transmitters that were supposed to activate battery-powered radios in homes were down. The morning storms had seen to that. Emergency sirens in several counties had no electricity to run. So even though the Storm Prediction Center had nailed the forecast, even though local National Weather Service offices issued warnings with an average of 24 minutes lead time, even though TV meteorologists were practically begging people to take cover, some people never got the message. This is the paradox of modern tornado warning systems. They're incredibly sophisticated. Dual polarization radar can detect debris in the air. Confirmation a tornado is on the ground. Forecasters can see rotation in storms hours before they produce. Warnings are more accurate than ever. But they depend on infrastructure, and infrastructure can fail. After April 27th, emergency managers learned a hard lesson. Redundancy isn't optional. You need multiple ways to warn people. Sirens, yes. Weather radios, yes. TV and internet, yes. But also, community alert systems, door-to-door notifications in the most vulnerable areas, storm shelters in every school and mobile home park. Because on April 27th, even good warnings weren't enough to prevent catastrophic loss of life. And the day wasn't over. As the sun lowered toward the western horizon, the outbreak was accelerating. Multiple supercells, simultaneous violent tornadoes, were tearing across Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee. 5:45 p.m. Rainsville, Alabama, another EF5, the fifth EF5 of the outbreak, the fourth that day alone. It carved through Rainsville and surrounding communities with winds up to 205 miles per hour. The damage defied description. Homes reduced to bare foundations. Debris scattered miles away. Trees shredded. 23 people died. But there wasn't time to process Rainsville because more tornadoes were already on the ground. 6 p.m., Shoal Creek Valley, Alabama. An EF4, over a mile wide, on the ground for 21 miles. The damage path overlapped areas still recovering from earlier tornadoes. 7 p.m., Ringgold, Georgia. An EF4 tornado, 3/4 of a mile wide, crossed from Alabama into Georgia, hitting Ringgold head-on. Then it continued into Tennessee, crossing the Appleton area near Chattanooga. 20 people died along this track. The tornado was relentless. It moved at 60 miles per hour, faster than most cars on rural roads. Trying to outrun it was impossible. Radar loops from the evening show something meteorologists had never seen at this scale. Multiple tornadic supercells, tracking parallel paths across the same region, producing long-track violent tornadoes simultaneously. It was overwhelming. Emergency managers were dealing with dozens of ongoing tornado emergencies at once. Dispatch centers were flooded with calls. First responders were trying to reach people in towns that no longer existed as they knew them, and the tornadoes kept coming. By 8 p.m., the sun had set. The storms continued in darkness. EF3s, EF4s, brief EF2s. The count was impossible to track in real time. All across Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, Mississippi, people huddled in the dark, no power, sirens wailing or silent. The roar of tornadoes in the distance, or nearby, or directly overhead. Every rumble of thunder sounded like another tornado. Every gust of wind felt like the moment your roof would tear off. And then, slowly, the storms began to weaken. By 10 p.m., the main line of supercells had moved into North Carolina. The atmosphere was finally stabilizing. The jet stream was shifting, the instability decreasing. Overnight, a few more tornadoes touched down as the system moved toward the Atlantic coast. But they were weaker, briefer. By dawn on April 28th, the outbreak was winding down. 47 additional tornadoes touched down from Florida to New York as the cold front pushed eastward, mostly EF0s and EF1s, some damage, injuries. But the intense phase was over. As the sun rose on Thursday morning, the true scale of what had happened began to emerge. Aerial surveys revealed scars, brown paths cut through green forests, entire towns changed, roads blocked by debris, power lines down everywhere, emergency crews picking through rubble, searching for survivors. The numbers were staggering. On April 27th alone, depending on the counting method, between 207 and 224 tornadoes touched down. Some counts include tornadoes that cross state lines as one continuous event. Others count each state segment separately. What's not in dispute: the violence. 4 EF5 tornadoes in a single afternoon. Multiple EF4s over 100 miles long. Tornadoes that maintained violent intensity for hours. The death toll from April 27th, 316 people in one day. For the entire 4-day outbreak, April 25th through 28th, the totals were 362 to 368 tornadoes, depending on the source. At least 321 people killed, with some counts as high as 324. The economic damage, $12 billion in 2011 dollars, adjusted for inflation, the costliest tornado outbreak in U.S. history. But beyond the numbers, the stories. April 27th, 2011, changed how America thinks about tornadoes. The forecast was nearly perfect. The Storm Prediction Center's high risk, issued hours in advance, verified almost exactly as predicted. That 45% probability, spot on. But perfect forecasts don't save lives if the warnings can't reach people. In the aftermath, communities invested in infrastructure, backup power for sirens, more NOAA weather radio transmitters, better redundancy. Schools and mobile home parks built storm shelters, because April 27th taught a brutal lesson. When an EF5 hits, anything less than underground or a reinforced safe room is insufficient. Emergency managers revise their plans. How do you handle dozens of simultaneous tornado emergencies? How do you coordinate rescues when roads are impassable and entire towns are damaged? The National Weather Service refined its warning language. Tornado emergency became more common for the most dangerous situations. Damage threat tags, considerable and catastrophic, were added to warnings to communicate severity. And forecasting improved even more. Better radar, better models, impact-based warnings that tell you not just that a tornado is coming, but what will happen if you don't take cover. But perhaps the most important lesson was about community. In the days and weeks after April 27th, people came together, neighbors helping neighbors dig out, volunteers from across the country bringing food, water, supplies, churches and community centers becoming shelters. The resilience of places like Tuscaloosa-Birmingham, Hackleburg-Phil Campbell, Smithville, Ringgold, it's remarkable. Today, those towns have rebuilt. Memorials stand where the tornadoes hit hardest. Schools teach tornado safety every spring. Sirens are tested monthly. And every year, on April 27th, people remember. They remember the sound, the fear, the loss. But they also remember survival, resilience, the way a community comes together when everything else is torn apart. Because that's the other story of April 27th, 2011. Not just the destruction, but the determination to rebuild, to honor those lost, to prepare. So, it never happens quite the same way again. The atmosphere will produce more outbreaks. That's inevitable. The ingredients will align. The jet stream will dip. Supercells will form. But we're better prepared now because of the hard lessons learned on the deadliest tornado day in modern American history. Remember April 27th, 2011, not just for what we lost, but for what we learned and for the strength we found when the sky fell.